Welcome. This is a presentation about great requirement ideas, and it's based on a true story that took place. I call this an Adirondack Railroad requirement adventure. This is a story that took place. The players in the story are myself, Rob Sabourin, and my wife Anne, and we shared an adventure together, and it involved a trip to New York City. Well, there was a sort of a motivation or two around it. We had a problem at the time. We've lived in our home in Roxborough since 1987. The house was built in 1957 and was pretty much in its original shape when we bought it. And the kitchen was basically a 1957 kitchen. And the kitchen was sort of funky, a bit awkward. The organization was tricky. To get anywhere in the house, you almost always had to cut through the kitchen. There was doorways in the kitchen that led to the basement. There was doorways that led to the backyard. There was doorways that led to the front of the building. There was doorways that led to the dining room. And people would basically walk through the kitchen all the time, no matter what they were doing, whether they were going to the kitchen for a purpose or not. It was a bit awkward. We had 3 young kids. They were running around all over the place. Whenever we had company and guests, they would always aggregate in the kitchen. The kitchen was quite small and old-fashioned in style, awkward for sure. Anyone who studies kitchen dynamics would recognize something called a work triangle, which is the sort of space between the cooking area, the refrigerator area, and the water area, the sink. And in our case, if you drew that triangle, almost everyone who cut through the kitchen had to actually cut through that triangle. So it was really, really in the way. It was basically a claustrophobic center of activity for everybody. So it's a bit funky. And we always felt that it would be a good idea to sort of improve the kitchen, improve it was sort of our goal. And we wanted to figure out how to do it. We had a dream. We had a dream that we could somehow have a beautiful, modern, efficient, practical, non-crowded, open plan kitchen. That's what we sort of wanted to have. And I suppose we felt that it was one of our goals to improve that sometime. Of course, with a young family, it's tricky to find the time to do something, and it might be a pretty big renovation project. So we just sort of never really got around to it. But as luck would have it, I was invited to kick off the premier WOPR conference. WOPR stands for the Workshop on Performance and Reliability Testing, and it's a style of workshop we call a lost style of workshop. It's facilitated, and people share experiences, first-person stories. And I was asked to do it. I was asked to actually do the opening presentation at this brand new conference, and it was sort of an honor. It was hosted by Ross Collard, one of my mentors and gurus in the field of software testing as part of product development. He claimed at the time to have taught more people than anyone else on the planet Earth about software testing. And Scott Barber, a guru in performance testing at the time, and a writer and speaker on the subject that I've met at many conferences over the years. And the conference would be facilitated by James Bach. James Bach is, of course, pioneer of many elements of software engineering, testing, a guru in exploratory testing, really a thinker, a creative tester, someone who has really advanced the field a lot. So it was just an impressive thing to be invited to, basically kick off such an important conference. And I was also pretty impressed by where it was going to be. It's going to be in Manhattan, in New York City. I live in Montreal. This is New York City, south of Montreal. Drive about 6 hours plus whatever time it takes to go through customs. And the building was in Tribeca, a gorgeous building called the Textile Building, 66 Leonard Street, where Ross Collard lived in a condominium in that building, but also there was a nice conference area in the building which he had arranged to rent for the Whopper conference. So we're going to have it in this beautiful, beautiful venue in Tribeca. It's just fantastic location for a get together. So this was the Whopper theme, right? So we were going to be talking about forming trustworthy conclusions in testing. And I had a really wonderful experience to share. So I was excited. My experience was really, really relevant to the topic and just really something that I had worked on recently, and I had lots of data and lots of stuff to share. So I was really excited and looking forward to this. And Anne and I were able to sort of go down together. So we decided to sort of make it an adventure, and we decided to go down instead of by plane or by train, by car. We went by train. We decided to go by train, and we took this the trip. What's called the Adirondack. It's a train line between Montreal and New York City. It's been running forever. It's my whole life it's been going on. And we were going to go by train. It takes about 12 hours to go by train. And we were going to stay in New York. We had reservations at the Pennsylvania Hotel, the one in the famous song, you know, the Pennsylvania Hotel. So we were going to go there, stay at the famous Pennsylvania Hotel, and take the Amtrak Adirondack from Montreal to New York City by train. And this was a great opportunity for us to hang out on the train, and we weren't going to sort of sleep and eat. We were going to probably try to do something. So we basically took our kitchen requirements with us on the train ride. And we took the time on the trip to understand our goals, to really understand what is it that we wanted to achieve with our kitchen project. We wanted to map it out, we wanted to decide really what the goals were. And we wanted to be in a position when we came back to Montreal, to kick off the project, to really get it done. So we were basically going down there on this beautiful, beautiful train ride through the Adirondack Mountains and then the Hudson Valley, all the way from Montreal to New York City, you know, 12 hours basically. And we were basically sitting in the train. We had nice economy seats with plenty of space to write. And I brought my computer, and we had actually got a power, so we didn't run out of battery or anything like that. So we left from Central Station in Montreal. With all sorts of, you know, readiness and excitement, and going to work on our kitchen project on the train. And of course, the first thing we wanted to do during our trip, other than, you know, just sit down and sort of enjoy the view, was to basically try to identify what were the requirements for our kitchen project. What were our requirements? Now, most people, when they think of renovating a kitchen, they start by drawing diagrams of what they'd like the kitchen to be, and then exploring the alternatives and looking at comparing this design with that design. But we decided instead that we'd take a pragmatic approach, sort of like I learned in software engineering, you know, start by listing the requirements. And instead of identifying issues like where's the stove going to be relative to the sink, we wanted to be a bit more modern. So we wanted to identify the real problems to solve. What are the real problems that we're trying to solve, and try to enumerate them? So we took a look at that. And we decided to identify requirements and sort of describe them in a style similar to what you would call a user story. A user story is a way to state a requirement which describes the relationship between like users of a system and the system they use. And when there's this relationship, it's not just a relationship, it's to get something done, to achieve something to get a purpose done, something purposeful done. And so we tried to collect user stories related to our kitchen project. And this involved basically identifying who are the users, who uses the kitchen, how was the kitchen used, why was the kitchen used, and also we looked at when was the kitchen used. So we got all sorts of things. How was our kitchen used? And so we studied this, we asked ourselves this, and we started to sort of brainstorm about the subject. So for each who that we identified, we sort of said, what did they do? And we asked, when did they do what they did? And we checked out for recent uses, like who used the kitchen like today? Who used it last week? Who used it last month? Who used it last year? And then what about special occasions? Like what happened at Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, Easter, all these different occasions. So what happened during the occasions? What happened when there was a barbecue? What happened seasonally? Is there something that we did different in the summer, the winter, the fall, the spring? Were there any unexpected uses? Can we remember things that happened in the kitchen that weren't expected or intended for the kitchen? And we took note also, we're looking for omissions. Did we miss something? And inconsistencies. And we basically noted all the usage scenarios that we could think of. And we described all of them, except there might have been one that we omitted from the list. But everything else we took diligently down and we recorded. And that's the train is going. Now we're on the train here, right, from Montreal to New York. So we're passing by all these different places along the route. And the first major stop is Plattsburgh on the American side. And we basically, by the time we were in Plattsburgh, started to basically put down our requirements. And so we used lateral thinking, basically looking at de Bono's 6 thinking hats, thinking of different perspectives. Then once we had modeled something, we looked for holes in it. We did what's called a gap analysis. We also looked at sort of what was similar and what was different. That's called affinity analysis. Like in Sesame Street, one of these things belongs together. One of these things doesn't belong, that sort of stuff. We looked at object action models when we identified an activity. What is the object related to the action? What is the action related to the object? We looked at the object of the kitchen to try to come up with usage scenarios. Like there's a kettle. What do you use the kettle for? Well, we make tea. Okay, so then making tea is something you do in the kitchen. And we also looked at failure modes. Like what if something goes wrong? Was there something we did in the kitchen because the plumbing broke, or because the stove was not working, or because the heating system in the house was out, or something like that? So let's look at failure modes. All of these to try to understand examples of what are usage scenarios, and we can describe those as the stories for the requirements of our kitchen project. By the time we got to Ticonderoga, New York, and that's a beautiful picture of Fort Ticonderoga. By the time we got to Ticonderoga, New York, we had a pretty good list of user stories. So basically, we didn't describe them in the Cohen style. We just basically listed what were the things that we do in the kitchen. And so we had identified a whole bunch of them, like making breakfast, preparing supper, throwing out junk mail, baking things, preparing coffee, storing our barbecue lighters, preparing water bottles for bicycle rides. We basically had 111 usage scenarios, user stories identified, collected. We collected them in a spreadsheet. We used an Excel spreadsheet to collect this information, and I still have the spreadsheets, and I'm happy to share them with people. By the time we got to Lake George, this is a beautiful, beautiful lake, just sort of part of the Adirondacks, an hour or two out of Ticonderoga. We basically started documenting also project constraints. So for example, we wanted the exhaust to go through the roof. We wanted to be able to rip out the counter. We wanted the cupboards above the right and left of the stove. We had all these constraints that we documented. We took note of them. We had constraints. So we had basically now 111 requirements and about 60 constraints. By the time we get to Albany, the capital city of New York, which is a really funky town to hang out in, but we stayed on the train, but by the time we got there, we had a notion of what the requirements were, but we wanted to describe the importance of the requirements. So we basically looked at each and every one of the requirements and sort of asked ourselves, is that a high importance, low importance, medium importance? What is importance, relative importance to my wife and I? And this is a subjective opinion, but it's our subjective opinion and it's our kitchen and we're trying to decide. And we sort of said, well, high, that importance is sort of like, wow, this is like mandatory. If we don't have that, forget it. The kitchen project is useless. And low, well, we not worry too much about that one. It's something we need, but it's something we might make trade-offs on. And everything else is sort of in the middle at medium. So we ranked them. We went through the 110 things, one at a time, ranked them, tried to make sure we were consistent, and it worked out pretty good. We listed them all there. We had them all figured out, and we ended up with a sort of variety. So we had 41 items that were high. So 41 of our stories was what we consider high importance. 12 of them medium, and 30 were low. This is not a completely uniform distribution, but I'm pretty comfortable with it. It's sort of something I think, it's not everything is high. It's not like those stakeholders who come and tell you every requirement is high. No, it's pretty balanced. So we were happy with that. we didn't want to dig too deep, but we did make sure we had consistency as we went through it. So when we had something that was high or low, we always had a reason and we discussed it. Time we get to Schenectady, New York. This is a town getting further south. Schenectady, New York. There's a lot of activities there. I believe there's horse racing in Schenectady. Anyhow, we had then drafted a sketch and had put together Plan A, our first sketch of what we maybe think the new kitchen's going to look like. And you'll notice in this sketch, there's still the same 3 doors. We're not changing the doors. And that's the downstairs and outside there. So you can see where the sink is, the dishwasher, the stove. We wanted to put the fridge over here and the desk there. The fridge used to be where the desk area is. And this is our notion of this, saying, that looks like an interesting plan. We thought this was pretty clever. And what's interesting also is the triangle for work now is not crossing through the pathway from the house to downstairs or to the backyard. So we thought that's pretty clever to figure that out. That was a big innovation. So we said, let's take a look at this plan and see how can we sort of rate this plan. So we decided on a ranking scheme. So for every single story, we'd look at it, 110 stories, top down. We'd look at one story at a time and would ask, okay, if we implemented Plan A, would the quality of that story, the quality be the same, better, or worse? Would it be harder to do, easier to do, or about the same? Would it be more fun to do or less fun to do, or about the same? So we basically ranked for every story, same, better, or worse. Same, no change in quality. Better, improved quality. Worse, diminished quality. Remember, it's our subjective assessment, but we went through them all one by one and basically came up with a ranking. We also wanted to basically score the story. And so we gave it a score. We computed a score. We had a little lookup table. The score was computed by looking at the ranking and the importance of it. And a story had attention if it was problematic or of concern. It was okay if it was neutral or there was no impact. And it was excellent if it was like the desirable solution. So we gave this sort of ranking. And so basically, for every single story, we basically identified an importance. We looked at the plan and said, hey, what's the impact? Based on the plan, is it the same, better, or worse? And based on the importance and the impact, we computed a score which was basically excellent, okay, or attention. So we did this for all 110 stories. Again, watching for inconsistencies. And we found at the end of that exercise that for Plan A, we have 40 of the stories were the same as the current state of the kitchen. 57 are better than the current state of the kitchen, and 11 are worse. And we had a total of 111 stories. So that's right. So that's the total count. So that's 40 are better, 14 are worse. We decided that we're going to give them basically a sort of a ranking here, but we had 9 that needed attention, 60 that were okay, and 42 that were excellent. And our score would be -2 times the attention plus, I believe it's plus 2 times this one and 0 times that one, if I'm not mistaken, 18 for, so we add this to it, I believe. I don't remember the exact equation, but we end up with here a rating of 66. So 2 times 48 minus 18, I think, is 66. So that's the scoring. We calculated the ranking. So the rating of this Plan A is 66. Now we continue on the train down, and one of the next major stops is Poughkeepsie, New York. This used to be a high-tech zone, and my mother had some friends and relatives in this area. I believe IBM had their main offices near here during the heyday of mainframe computing. So we basically looked at Plan B and came up with a Plan B. She tweaked Plan A, adapted it a bit, moved the fridge over, adjusted a bit where the dishwasher was, and then we went and we reviewed Plan B against the current situation. So the importance didn't change, but the impact did change, and so the score changed. And we went through them all 110, and we found out in this case that we had 38 stories were the same, 72 were better, and only one was worse. Now we're starting to get sort of pretty cool situation here. So none of them basically needed attention. 58 were okay, and 53 were excellent. So the score would be 2 times 53 plus 0 times 58 plus minus 2 times 0, which gives us 106. So that's our ranking for this one. So that's basically much higher than the previous one. And that's cool. Now, we continued along the train ride, and of course on the way, and crafted plan, the next stop was Yonkers, by the way, and crafted plan C. And in plan C, things started to look really cool. A lot of things got better and better and better. And in the end, we ended up with 34 things that were the same, 77 were better, and none were worse. And when we applied our ranking here, we basically found 0 needed attention, 53 were okay, and 58 were excellent, which means the rating goes up to 116. Unfortunately, that's not as big a jump as we were hoping for, but still 116 is awesome. We get to Manhattan, all right. So Manhattan's there, arrive in Penn Station, right across from the Pennsylvania Hotel. Everything is good, everything is exciting. So we're basically back to our hotel, and we basically, have a nice nap. Plan C looked pretty good. Anne wakes up really early in the morning and shows me with excitement Plan D. So this is the hotel, Pennsylvania Hotel, New York City. This is a classic hotel. It's a beautiful hotel. And Anne comes up with this plan. So you look where the fridge is and the stove is the other side of the room. Wow, this is a totally different view of the universe. And it's brilliant that Anne came up with this at night. It was like a aha moment. And we looked at it and we ranked everything. We went through the impacts. A lot of them, we look at all the green, a lot of them were better, a lot of them were better, a lot of them were better. And we found that in this case, 4 were the same, 107 were better, and none were worse. 0 needed attention, 36 were okay, 75 were excellent, giving us a rating of 150. So this is awesome. Now we basically, of course, there's a whole thing now. There's a gap in the story because I went to the conference. The Whopper conference lasted for 3 days. It was an awesome experience. I got to meet and get to know some great people and build relationships, which are still active today. And I had a chance to do and learn wonderful things. And in the end, on the last night of the conference, we went to a play. The only play we could get tickets to that was on Broadway was a silly, silly play called You're in Town. The plot unbelievably has to do with charging people money to use public bathrooms. And it was a silly, silly play, but it was on Broadway, and we went and we enjoyed it, and we had a good time and had a nice meal. And that was almost the end of our adventure. But we had to take a look at what we learned from all this, and we sort of saw, okay, well, the design rankings were there, the ratings were there, and we saw that Plan D was over double Plan A. And so we had this interesting comparative analysis of our different designs, assessing the value really they deliver based on the requirements. And it was pretty clear for us, Plan D was the one to go with. And so we got back to Montreal, and where we live in Roxborough. It's a suburb of Montreal. That's our house on the left there. And we basically, we're there at our home in Roxborough, and we got a professional proposal made based on Plan D. And we had, really experts in cabinetry and kitchen design, and got the proper measurements and did everything really professionally. And then something unusual and unexpected happened. And we had forgotten to really pay a lot of attention to context drivers. And anyone in software engineering knows context matters. Context matters. And these are factors that influence how you prioritize and organize things and how you make decisions on projects. And the one that we sort of forgot to consider in all of our beautiful usage scenario analysis was budget. Budget. And the cost of doing the renovation, the way we had planned Plan D, based on what we came up with, without including the plumbing and wiring work just the basic organization physically of the kitchen was well over $30,000 plus tax, which was way over what Ann and I had either available or anticipated to do the project. And so today, our kitchen, our current kitchen, 20 years later, is still pretty much the same. There's a few tweaks we did, a few things to change the counters. We put some cupboards underneath to give us more space, but it's basically the same work triangle, the same organization, and the same thing that we started with before this whole adventure. So there's a lesson here. Context matters. It's fun, though, the way we prioritized based on value, the way we looked at usage scenarios is a novel way to design requirements for a kitchen. But if you just went to a contractor in the Montreal area and you showed him those usage scenarios, I don't think he would have ever come up with a practical design. I think he would have said, what are you, nuts? Why don't you show me a sketch of what you want and I'll get the job done. Anyhow, thank you for paying attention. Have a great day. Take care.